Irish mythology, and there's this legend of this guy, Cuchulainn, which sounds curiously similar to the Mayan Kukulkan, and that was something I noticed right away.
Mm-hmm.
And Cuchulainn was able to, he had his arm severed, and then they gave him a mechanical arm. And it's describing that it was metallic, and it's like, I'm thinking, okay, this is thousands and thousands of years old. And they're talking about it just as plain as day, and that then another guy came in and helped Cuchulainn actually put flesh on the metallic arm. And, there's all kinds of strange references in there to technology that seems like it's science fiction, but yet it may not be in 20 years if we have all these breakthroughs.
So that's another reason why this disclosure could be, kept such a big secret, because it would blow religions right out of the water.
Well, yeah. I mean, what we're dealing with ultimately is that humans have come to the planet. They have been treated as gods. They've mated with human Earth women. And then the human Earth women gave birth to what were called demigods, which are hybrid humans. They're part extraterrestrial human and part Earth human. And if you look at the legends of demigods, Heracles or Hercules is one example. These demigods are much more powerful than a regular human being. They have an incredible ability to kick ass.
Mm-hmm.
And so like Hercules, that's one of the things. If you actually go through and you read the myths, which I now am much more educated on this than I was before, thanks to History Channel. These demigods invariably take on these massive quests of valor to try to prove that they are strong and fearsome and totally able to kick ass. And so these guys obviously have powerful abilities. Well, the part that's one of the most fascinating things, and this, I do have to say that there are bloodlines, and the bloodlines have traditionally been within what you would call royalty, although a lot of that royalty is not actually holding power now. A lot of the royal families were deposed, and they are no longer actually running anything as much as they are like behind the scenes. But the point is that these demigods mated with other humans, and they had advanced abilities, and over time, the more they've continued breeding, the more that those abilities have tapered off. And so you obviously don't see people walking around who have the abilities of demigods now. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, they did inherit these magical bloodlines, the magic power of these demigods that were extraterrestrial humans. And so it's going to be, at some point, one of our major fascinating disclosures that, in fact, there are groups of humans here on Earth who are now basically people like us, although some of them started from somewhere else, and they've had Stargate technology working, running here on Earth the whole time. And I'm talking 10,000, 11,000, 12,000 years. The Stargates have always been here. We've never...
Have you heard of any Stargate in Iran?
Not Iran, but Iraq. I definitely know there's one in the southeast corner of Iraq. Fascinating story. I got it from Henry Deacon not too long ago. We spoke again fairly recently. And he was telling me that there's several of these ancient systems that are out there. And one of the ancient systems is remarkably similar to what's in the Stargate SG-1 and Atlantis television show.
Mm-hmm.
The real one, apparently, is under heavily fortified military guard. You have to go through multiple checkpoints, and there's all these buildings around it. So on the ground, you couldn't even see what it was. All you'd see is it looks like there's a military base. But as you go through the checkpoints, you get to the inside. What you find is, of course, a giant ring. And then on either side of the ring are what appear to be these two tall stone pillars that are squared off like obelisks, except that they're quite eroded, and wherever the tips would be, there's nothing there anymore. The tips, if there were tips there, they've broken off. But basically you have this ring, and they typically don't like to use these ancient gates because the ancient systems give you a wormhole ride. And it's actually been depicted at the end of the movie Contact. Now, I worked with, and I am working with, Jim Hart, who was the guy who sat for 2 years with Carl Sagan to develop that screenplay. Carl Sagan never once let Jim know that there was any truth behind what they were writing.
Mm-hmm.
But I've heard from other people who are very much plugged in that Carl Sagan was a member of Majestic 12 directly, and he knew exactly what was going on. And that's why there's so much disclosure in that movie. I was actually quite buffaloed when I realized that the writer didn't know what was going on. And again, I got that firsthand. We've spoken many times about that, and Carl never gave the slightest tip of the hat that there was something going on. But nonetheless, if you look at the end of the movie Contact, or if you look in the television show Stargate, and there's a few other examples out there, that wormhole ride is what happens when you go through one of these ancient gates. The problem is that the level of psychic attunement that you need to have to go through this is a level that we don't normally possess. And this goes back to what my contact from the Montauk Project, or what they actually call Phoenix 3, because Phoenix had 2 other phases before it got to that stage. This guy, Daniel, brought out some very interesting information. For those of you who don't know, Phoenix 3 was basically a seat from a UFO. I've talked about this in my online video, 2012 Enigma. A seat from a UFO that was hooked up to a power supply, excuse me, and the power supply allowed this UFO seat to become a psychic amplifier for the person who sits in the chair. And there was only one guy who could really run the chair well, although they did have a rotating team of other people that were trying to run the chair. But the guy who could run it well was named Duncan Cameron. He's still around. And I know other people who have been closely acquainted with him. So when Duncan had to have a very advanced psychic ability to be able to run the chair. He had to put his mind into something called quiet point. And there were a series of wavelengths that the chair would give off, and when his mind went quiet, some of these waves would all be still, but some of them would look like a big slope, and some of them would look more like a flat line, and some of them would look like a more gentle slope, but they all basically stay still. And then when they're all still, the operators of the chair would have to do something called zeroing out the chair, where they crank these little knobs under the wave of each wave, and it tunes the machine so that the actual chair is tuned to that person's frequency. All the waves go flat. That's the point. So you crank the knob so that the wave looks flat. Once the chair is zeroed out, it then serves as a psychic amplifier for the human consciousness. And so it's important to point out when the chair itself doesn't actually make the Stargate. We have the ability to make a Stargate with our consciousness. The chair simply gives us the power boost that we need to actually do that. But the chair doesn't make the Stargate. The chair just gives us the energy that we need to be able to do it. That's a fascinating distinction that I didn't really make clear in the 2012 video that people have asked me about. And eventually we will reach the point where we can do this on our own without the use of any technology at all. And that's where we get into more of these sort of ascended categories of being. And there's many masters here on Earth who have accomplished that, have been able to teleport themselves or even bilocate, things like that.
Yeah, I always thought that we've been in this war for so long, and it just seems like to control the area. And I had thought maybe there was a Stargate or something that was there that was the real reason for being there.
There's been a lot of speculation of that. I think that it was. I do think that on a blunt physical level, a lot of it was oil, but definitely there was a Stargate component to this as well.
Yeah. Last time we talked, you had brought up BRIC, the different nations that were, for lack of a better term, the white Illuminati, or the other faction that was counteracting what the elite were doing.
Well, most of the people in Brazil, Russia, India, China don't have white skin, but I would say they're the good guys.
Yeah. So
I know you didn't mean white in terms of the skin, but yeah.
Light. Okay, light, good, whatever. But the point is, is this part of the China October surprise? Is know what I'm getting at? Is this part of the China October surprise?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Let's get into that a little bit.
Well, I'll tie into that because a lot of people are going to be pissed off if I don't finish what I was going to with this other thing about the Stargate. And then I'll tie back into that. So Daniel's work with this seat that opens up gates that you can go through, they had to work with ETs in order to perfect this technology. And one of the things they found out was that if you send people through these Stargates, they can easily go crazy. It's very difficult for an average human being to do that, to go through something like that. And they also found that your biological age would change. Like, for example, if you're sent into the future of where you are now, your body will quickly age to what level of age you should be in the future.
Wow.
And apparently this is like a natural law that's been designed to keep us from violating the rules of nature. So the way that system works is called a zero-time reference. When you're born, actually it's when you're conceived, is the moment where there's an anchor point between your physical body and your astral or spiritual body, which they actually call the transient. On the insider programs, a lot of them call it the transient body. So that anchor point at the moment of conception is your zero-time reference, and if you want to be able to get any type of extra sensory perception, it always comes back to meditating, going to the quiet point within yourself, and then cranking the timeline back in time until the point where you were conceived, which is a psychological process that actually does require healing all your childhood issues and balancing out all that stuff. And I go into extensive detail on how to do this and all this black ops information in my online seminar that you can buy on the website for $77. It's called Access Your Higher Self. So you can get a lot more on this stuff in that video, which we're now post-producing, and we're going to release it as a professional version. For people who bought the original, they're going to be able to watch the professional one as well.
Okay.
Anyway, zero-time reference is when your astral body and your physical body are aligned. They did find that there are ways to shift your zero-time reference. So they can send you into the future and then shift your ZTR, as they call it, or zero-time reference, but we'll call it ZTR. They shift your ZTR so that it's like conversant with the age that you are now for wherever you end up going. And I've never really had it explained to me how they do that. But nonetheless, the problem is that there's a reality that you can go into where your ZTR becomes nebulous. It's like it can shift around easily, and it's not tethered to wherever you were when you were born. You go into like a timeless realm. And when you're going through the Stargate, the ancient Stargate system, your ZTR can easily get shifted because the strength of your ZTR, when you're in one of these timeless type of realms, is dependent upon your psychic aptitude, how much development you've had to basically be able to retain identity. And so a lot of people have done like psychedelic drugs, and if you've ever done them, you know that you lose a sense of self, and you kind of become more of an observer. And if you really, really trip out, you have like you could look at a bowl and be like, I wonder what that's for. And you don't even have, you can look at any of the stuff around you, and a part of you knows what it is, and another part of you is like totally willing to accept an alternative explanation. You don't even know if the floor is going to hold you up. I actually had that experience one time. It's kind of schizophrenic sounding stuff, but the point is that when you go into these parallel universes and stuff, it's a very similar experience to being on psychedelic drugs. And if you don't have the ability to maintain a sense of self and stay conscious enough and stay aware enough, then you can shift your ZTR, and when you come out on the other end, you now have what they call transdimensional disorder, which means that your ZTR has shifted from where your physical body was